Welcome to Insights into Success, where with your host Paul Dodds, we hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Frank, for agreeing to be on Insights into Success today. It's a real pleasure to have you on board, all the way from Colorado Springs in the beautiful state of Colorado. Just wondering if you might be able to kick us off by just telling us a little bit about who you are and what exactly you do at the moment.
Sure. I'm Frank Ricotta. I would consider myself a serial entrepreneur, and in the latest round, I'm the founder and CEO of Burst IQ. And Burst IQ really focuses on the whole problem of data and data privacy and how we use data to be a healthier person and live a better life.
Okay, so I want to learn a bit more about what exactly it is you do in more detail, but if you could, because I know as you just touched on that you have had a bit of an entrepreneurial life so far, could you just take us right back to the early days? Where were you born? And give us a little bit of insight into your early years, and so we can maybe understand whether it's had an influence on where you've come to today.
Sure. So going all the way back, I'm one of those rare people in Colorado. I'm a Colorado native. So I was born just south of Colorado Springs in a town called Pueblo, Colorado. It's a blue collar town, had a large immigrant population in the early 1900s. And one side of the family immigrated to Colorado kind of in the late 1800s, were miners and entrepreneurs themselves, restaurant owners and a lot of other things. On the other side of the family showed up in the early 1900s, around 1920. And my grandpa worked in the steel mill, and my grandma and grandpa together owned a liquor store. So kind of early roots, there's always been this little entrepreneurial blood in my veins from all those that came here and settled, and a little bit of a pioneering spirit. And over my lifetime, my mom and dad are both highly educated people, both have their EHDs, and education was always a big part of their life. But my dad, on the side, he, outside of being a teacher, teachers don't earn much money. He would build houses and remodel houses and take me along, and taught me what it meant to work hard and sweat a little bit, and helped me focus a little bit, stay out of trouble. And my mom's always been the creative one, so she taught me to think out of the box. And when it was time for me to decide what college I was going to go to, I wanted to go to to a school in Colorado. It was Colorado School of Mines. Is a great engineering school. I actually have two daughters that graduated from there. But my mom and dad said, we don't think so. From the standpoint, you got to go to the Airforce Academy.
Okay.
And helped me walk down that process of applying at all the military academies, and ended up deciding on going to the Airforce Academy, which was a long, laborious process. And
wow,
that just had a whole different journey in my life. Yeah, and it was fun going there. Taught me a lot of discipline and how to focus, how to balance a lot of things, and taught me a lot of leadership concepts. In addition to had just a wonderful opportunity to make friends, play little sports, get exposed to some things that I never would have had a chance to be exposed to. And then spent the first 8 years of my career in the Air Force. Too blind to fly.
Can I just pause you there, because I want to know more about that, because I'm always interested in hearing about military service. It's kind of an area of interest for me. But can I just take you back for a minute?
Yeah.
When you were in your early teens, what were your interests? And at that stage, what were your aspirations? What were you thinking you were going to do then before your parents persuaded you to go in the military?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great question. It if you'd have asked me back then, I wanted to go play baseball. So
Right. Okay.
not a, how many people have the talent to make it all the way to the majors, and definitely wasn't in that category, but it was one of those kind of aspirations. I would love to do that. And then, as I understood kind of where my lot in life was, it was really just, I was focused on being an engineer. Wanted to be an engineer, and wanted something that had a little bit of math to it. I was good at math, terrible at fuzzy studies and liberal arts. So started looking down that path of doing something in that vein. I knew I was going to go to college. I mean, that was
Right.
That was never in doubt. Given my parents, I was going to go, even if it was living at home in the basement and going to the local school or someplace else.
So before being persuaded to go in the military, what were you envisaging that you were going to study at university?
I looked into actuarial science. My dad said, "Hey, my dad was one of my math teachers in high school." Just to put it in perspective. So
Right.
he said, it's a good career. You want to take a look at that. And then when we started kind of exploring the military academies, I said, that whole nuclear science looks pretty cool. And but then as they dove into it, said, I'm not sure I can stay underwater for that long. being a mountain kid. And then I thought maybe medicine, actually.
Wow.
And at that time, teen years, and I was pretty young when I went into the academy. I was still 17 years old. I said, okay, doctor path sounds well. And then in those early, that first year of college, I said, well, I like computer science and I may want to do that. So maybe I'll kind of double track it until I hit my first biology class and had to remember all those big, long names for a frog. And that's probably not for me.
So and I want to touch on this too, because I have a similar experience on it. So I'm interested to hear whether it had any impact for you. But I'm a teacher's son as well. So I'm curious, and I got taught by my father for a period of time too. So I'm curious to know from you, in America, in your environment, how was that received by your fellow students? Was that an issue? Did that impact at all in your life?
I think my dad made sure it wasn't, because he was extra hard on me. There's a couple funny stories, because teaching in the high school, like I'd come home and he said, "Hey, why were you out of third period class?" I said, "How do you know I was out of third period class? I had to go to the bathroom." But he said, "I have eyes everywhere." Is what he would always tell me. But in his class, he was my teacher in his class. He didn't play any favorites. Actually, would always want me to do more. And there was a time where I was kind of tired and fell asleep. And I got home. He said, "I'm your teacher in class, but if you fail this next test, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because then I'm going to be your dad." And I ended up doing really well on the test. And he said, "People are going to think I'm giving you the test." Nobody ever really hassled me about it at all. It was really more because he ended up making me help tutor some of the other students as a way to way for me to grow, and he did that with other folks in my class. But he made sure that was never an issue.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because my father took very much the same approach. He was always harder on me than the other students, so I never really got any kickback as such in the class, because they all knew that I had to meet a higher standard than anybody else. So there was definitely no favoritism. I guess around the school was a bit more of an issue about whether, because you're the teacher's son, whether you'd go and tell tales on other people, which I never did. But a little bit of that came up from time to time, but not too much.
There's more people telling tales on me than me.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's it too. You had to hold yourself to a higher standard, because you knew that if you did something wrong, everyone would know about it, and you'd be in even more trouble than the average person. So it was actually, from that point of view, tougher on you, I think. It was from my experience.
Yep.
So, okay, so, all right, so you went into the military academy, into the Air Force. So what happened then? So did you go to university while you were in the Air Force?
Well, Air Force Academy is a university.
Okay.
They're great, very good university and very demanding. I mean, it's the selection process, again, not to say, hey, I'm all this and a bag of chips.
Yeah.
The selection process, kind of a whole person, is not just academically, but some physical standards. And did you do anything outside of school, community wise or anything like that? So there's this whole list, and then you have to go through this selection process with with one of the elected officials, a congressman or a senator, to get a nomination, because there's only so many spots. And
right.
First you have to qualify academically, and you get the nomination, then the academy has to accept you. And so took a year through the application process. And when I was there, it was kind of a rude awakening, because you're with all these really smart people, and you're taking you have quite an academic load. So, first semester, or might have been second semester, I got my first D ever. And I went home and said, yeah, Mom, just out in problems, kind of juggling all this. And then my mom, who's just a master educator, said, and really one of the early experts on whole brain learning, just taught me how to take notes different. And from then it was a lot better. So.
And so what were you studying while you were at university in the Air Force?
Well, there's a required track for everybody, within an academy. And it's, those hours were pretty much more than most other universities to get a degree. And it's a general engineering track. So you ended up, having, several years of chemistry and physics and aerospace engineering and astro and math and then philosophy and just a whole list of things. And then
right.
it was a major, and I was a computer science major.
Right. So how long did it take to finish your degree?
4 years.
And then what happened? What happened after that? Did you end up becoming a pilot?
Too blind. My eyes were too bad.
Right.
To be a pilot or a navigator. So I ended up, working with classified systems, particularly around the area of cybersecurity, high-speed networking, and data. What is data fusion, or called big data analytics.
Right. And so how long were you in the Air Force before you came out and went into the private sector?
8 years. I was in 8 years.
Right.
Yeah.
So at the end of that time, what were you thinking you were going to do next? What was your goals that you had set for yourself?
Well, I tell you while I was in the Air Force, my last assignment was down in Los Angeles Air Force Station, and which dealt with a lot of space systems. And I just happened to be in an area that we had a lot of interaction with Silicon Valley. So I'm kind of date myself. So you're really talking about kind of mid to late 1990s,
right?
In the early days, when you're walking in to Cisco and they have less than 100 folks on staff, and
wow.
They definitely weren't the number one networking company in the world. And same with, we were Next Computer's largest customer, and so just had a lot of exposure to Silicon Valley and that whole world up there. And when it was time to get out, and I've had I've had this itch, because I always dealt with innovation projects, even in the Air Force, to go out and really do something a little more entrepreneurial and kind of follow all these folks that I was interacting with up in Silicon Valley. And so when I started looking around, I met somebody who was a well-known consultant in his own right, and was working as a venture capitalist, and he needed someone to step in and be part of that consulting organization, and allowed me to get out and get a lot of really great exposure. And that's what started down the path.
So when you say consulting, you're consulting as part of a venture capital organization?
Well, it wasn't directly with the venture capital organization until a little bit later, when he left and started his own firm. But what we did was we worked a lot with startup companies. We used to say technology mostly created on the West Coast. I know No offense to other parts of the world or to the Boston area. But we take technology and then bring it to New York and in the financial sector. So it was kind of this bridge between innovation and Fortune 500 as applied technologies. It really was a lot of fun in that window of time.
So for you at that point, like, what was your strengths? What were the things that really you excelled at and that you were able to bring to the table in that role?
Oh, I think the one thing that's carried me most over the years is being able to solve problems in a creative way. So it was always good to have a really solid engineering kind of foundation when you're dealing with technology, both as a developer at one point in time, but also as a network engineer, and having the opportunity to do some really advanced things while I was in the Air Force in my last assignment, to include watching rockets launch, which is probably any kid's dream. But it's always, okay, how do you do this to change what you're doing and make it better? That's always been a solid strength of mine, and it's carried me forward in all aspects of my life over the last 30 plus years.
And so from having a background where education was important with both your parents and that, were you naturally inclined to want to constantly learn? So say, for instance, you might have an engineering background, but you felt very comfortable in learning other disciplines and growing in yourself through the whole journey. Was that a strength for you too?
I think that's a fair thing. I think, I love new tech, in a lot of ways, when it's, from a creative perspective. But my passion in terms of learning, always, through most of my career from a professional perspective, has really been around leadership. When I was in the military, it was around kind of military theory and leadership. It was because I was fascinated through military history. And then when I got out, it was, just consuming a lot of business and leadership books that allowed me to kind of build my own style from that perspective, and how to better communicate. The technology seemed to come a little easier, and the leadership when you're dealing with lots of softer skills, and smart people. It's not a tell them what to do. It's really a little more enabling them to do what they do best.
So did you always then sort of envisage yourself going towards a leadership role? So rather than being down and really hands-on involved in a particular project, you sort of more saw yourself as potentially being a leader and taking that type of role?
Yeah, it's always, if you go back to all the personality type assessments, I always fall in this category of love to solve the problem, but, get pretty bored at sitting there minding the details. A lot of engineers sitting there minding the details, even writing code, and I much preferred kind of painting in big broad bold strokes and working at a strategy level.
So tell me about your career and where it went to from that role.
So when I left, I joined that small consulting company. It was probably 10 at the time. Worked within that environment for a year or two. Like I said, we worked a lot with large organizations, from technology implementations in terms of strategy and even outsourcing strategies at that time. Ended up running it and being a majority owner in it over time, and grew it up to a few hundred people with offices around the world in that boom era. So we started adding more services besides consulting, some broader implementation and design services, and even a few products. And and then when that bubble happened, went from having this real thriving business and to a whole lot of the markets just disintegrating. And we had a lot of customers in the telecom space at the time. So if you remember, divestiture and all the new opportunities in cable and telecoms, just had a ton of customers there. And a lot of that just dried up, and we had, really good talent pool and some really good still underlying tech, and ended up selling that. bought it. Always had a cybersecurity streak to everything I've done, and
Yeah.
bought some tools we developed. Bought those back after the acquisition, and started a new company focused on endpoint security. When 9/11 happened, went back and kind of rolled that security set of experts into a government integrator, and did a lot of work for the government. And then a friend of mine who was the first CIO at Goldman asked me, and been a friend and mentor of mine over the years, asked if I'd come help him with a health tech startup, and was CTO there for a while. And
Yeah.
When he left, I said, time to go start a new one. And I got tired of people ripping my data off, and said, I'm going to go back and do security work and data privacy, and ended up staying in the health space as a starting point around health data, because health is so valuable, but it had a really great impact for people too. So that's the nut of it.
So from what you've told me, it sounds like you were willing to let go. You had a business, but you acknowledged that maybe it was time to move on. So you were able to do that. And then the other thing is that you were comfortable in constantly being aware or having an awareness of opportunities out there, and therefore being able to then take advantage of that. So rather than just being sort of very narrowly focused on what you're doing and not really seeing what's all going out there, it sounds like you had more of an overall awareness and the ability to pivot, as they like to say these days, into doing other things. Is that a fair assumption?
I think that's good, but I think there were some pretty rough spots along the way. So that first one I did, I mean, when you're an entrepreneur and it's your first company, if you're really doing it for the right motives, not just to make money, your heart and soul's in that company in so many ways. So I had a whole lot of things in my head about company culture, how you grow it, and we're just doing phenomenal. And part of that business model is when we work with startups, we reduce their fees and take some equity. So particularly in the early days of that company. So when all these internet IPOs were going, I had a really awesome portfolio, and ended up when things started to crash, and not understanding how quickly they were going to crash, ended up financing aspects of the company. And by the time it was all over, I went from having, I can retire, to being in debt quite a lot. And so it was devastating. And so there was a period of time that it was just devastating. It wasn't motivated to do much. Had to really kind of pick. If it wasn't for my family and my wife, I don't know if I'd got through it, and really had to reconnect on my spiritual life in terms of how I fall back on that, and how to regain confidence. I mean, it was, some of that in terms of regaining confidence is a hard thing to do after things that devastating and kind of that impactful. And it took a few years to do that before.
Right. And from what you're telling me, your family were key to that. Their support of you was a key part of your ability to get yourself through it and build yourself back up. Yeah,
because there were times I was in a window shortly after. I was kind of a jerk. I'm looking back, and just angry at life, just because so much was in there, and just all of a sudden it was like boom, it was gone, and you had to get over that. I mean, there's a whole mourning process when you do things as an entrepreneur. It's great when things go well, and when you have a good exit. When you're really invested in something, there's a mourning process associated with it that you have to walk through. I mean, it's the death of something. It's like the death of someone very close. You have to process, you have to understand it. You have to, deal with your own shortcomings and why something may have happened. And, those are always the highest growth moments anyway. And definitely have been for me in those moments of looking back, temporary failure, and definitely not permanent.
Yeah. So that's a good point I wanted to get on. You've already touched on it. So, I mean, looking back, in comparison, you had a period of time, it sounds like a relatively short period of time, where you had a lot of growth, a lot of success. And then you put that next to when it all, fell over, as it were. how, like, the amount of growth, the amount that you learned, any sense of, if you line them up, compared them to one another, how much more do you feel that you grew through that adversity, as opposed to when everything was going swimmingly well and you're growing left, right, and center, and you had all this equity and all these other IPOs that were going to, make you be able to retire at a very young age?
Well, in the first one, you're always a little bit blissfully naive, so you just think that you're invincible. And while you you feed your brain, if you're really active and you grow, it's incremental. When you really, when you're at the bottom, and when you're being successful, everybody wants to be around you as well. And when you hit bottom, it's a whole different perspective. If I go from the Air Force, I had a big budget and I could buy a lot of things. People loved you then, and then
Right.
company was doing great. People loved you, and when it cratered and you're sort of at the bottom, you end up feeling pretty alone. So it's that whole self reflection and understanding of who you are as a person, what's important in your life. I don't think there's any comparison in terms of how much more one has to grow in those moments, and then everything just being peachy keen and going great.
So aside from learning about what was important in your life, what are maybe some of the other things that really came out of that experience that you really learned?
Yeah. The success itself is fleeting anyway. And and all that piled up with whatever money you may have doesn't compare to really having people around you that truly love you, and
Right.
and making some of the choices in those early days. Well, I got to work, got this business to do, and I was on the road a ton because that was part of the trade-offs of living in Colorado at the time and have these wonderful technologies like we do today, and traveling a ton. And looking back, and I've had a healthy family, I would say now, but it's missing some things I probably shouldn't. If a do over, I wouldn't have missed. In those moments, I wouldn't have given away.
Yeah. And I read it in your profile. You talk about your guiding principles. Can you kind of talk me through that? Because it seems to play in a really important part in your life.
Yeah. I adopted those from one of my old bosses and mentors, actually, from the Air Force. We've been friends since, and modified them for me, which is make a difference, have fun, make money. And, make a difference is for everybody around you, yourself, your company, your shareholders, your community, and your family, most important, and having fun. Life's just too short to be miserable in doing anything you're doing. Which is probably why I started out on the entrepreneurial road. I just felt too confined in just in most jobs. And my philosophy is that if the first two are in alignment, and you're good, you feel you're making a difference, and you're really enjoying what you do, you're usually content with the third. And it could be a lot or it could be a little, depending on what you're doing. It's not the quantity there. It's really more being content with it. And when I found when that was first, I was probably the most miserable in my life, in terms of chasing the wrong things.
So looking back now today, what has been your greatest challenges or challenge that you've faced so far?
Like recent?
Well, no, just in your career so far, whether it be personal or career wise. But what do you think's been the greatest challenge that you've had to face and overcome?
I think some of it we hit on, right, is dealing with your own insecurities in a way that still allows you to be successful. And I'll probably tell you that most entrepreneurs are highly insecure people, or tend to be in a tight day. They a lot mask it in many ways, but there's something in there that drives you. So learning how to deal with that's always a tough challenge, and the emotional ups and downs, in terms of, the euphoric moments and really kind of borderline depressive moments. You got to deal with that from a mental health perspective. And then, from a business perspective, it's always, it's very rarely been, okay, what are we doing? Every now and then you have to, like in this last business, in this current business in Burst IQ, a few years ago, a lot of customers want to do more analytics and kind of be smart data scientists. And I said, well, that's not what we started to do as a business. And we're doing pretty well financially, but that's not, we got to reset and go back to really connect with why we're doing this. And took the company down to zero revenue. And in 6 months, we were back to break even. I think it was hard to make that decision because went through a good period of time with no professional income. But those are tough, but those are right things to do.
So you've got to really have that self-belief, though, to do that, though, don't you? I mean, because that's a big call to do what you did, and you could have got it wrong.
Yeah, we would be talking today for sure.
No, exactly.
And there's been times since I've looked back and said, did we do the right thing? And always second guessing. But I overall I do. I think that was the right decision. I think that the team in this company is just a phenomenal team. They're a pleasure to be around. It's not kind of low drama, just good energy, which was the right thing. And even making some hard calls and separating with people you really like but just don't fit. Those end up being good calls, 99% of the time.
Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to touch on. So you're saying your belief is, if I've got this right, is that it's critical to have a team that all gel together properly, and if you've got someone that just doesn't quite fit, you're better to cut them loose than to try and make them fit. Is that part of your philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of giving people opportunities, but you have to be and nurturing a bit. Sometimes people have good skills, but there are other times that they're just not fitting in what you're doing. May fit in a different scenario, and it's more detrimental to the broader team and productivity to try to force fit something than just to make the call. And what I've found over the years is that when you do that, you both end up in good spots, right? The company ends up in anywhere, and the person usually, if they're talented, and one would hope you only hire talented people, they land on their feet and end up in a better situation for them as well.
So what would your advice be, though, Frank? Like, I don't know about in America, but I think you've got the same issue as what we have at the moment because of COVID. And that is that there's a real shortage of people out there to employ.
Yeah.
And quality people. So if you've got a situation you need to fill a position, if you can't find the right person, there's someone that's okay, but they don't really fit your culture. What would be your advice? Do you employ them and make do, or do you hang out and just deal with the shortage in the interim till you find the right person? What would be your advice?
Man, that's an awesome question, because we struggling with that now in terms of, this person's very talented, but we know it's going to disrupt some team chemistry. And we've had to let people go that are doing just that. I think it's situational, because there are times when, particularly in this work remote, which is a whole different animal in and of itself, that people like that can be productive with you, that are talented. But I would say, prioritize attitude and aptitude. Skills are really important. Having the skills you need, a lot of time you can't replace those. Yeah. But as a general rule, you gotta weigh pretty heavy in attitude and aptitude. Particularly like for us, when we're doing new tech, like we work a lot with blockchain technologies and extending them. You're not going to find people that have that deep skill set. So you got to have that. They got to be willing to learn, and they got to have and the aptitude to learn, and they got to just be able to want to roll up their sleeves and be a positive influence. That becomes more important, as I've learned over the years.
One of the things I've sort of observed over here, at least, is that there's a lot of businesses where their growth is hampered because of their inability to get the right staff.
Yeah.
Businesses are being held back because they can't find the right people.
Yeah. And which kind of leads you into this whole, this whole aspect of the challenge as a leader in today's world is how do you develop your staff, right? How do you develop and grow them in a way that's beneficial for both you as a company and for them personally? And that's the challenge of this next decade. When they talk about the Great Resignation, it's really people leaving to figuring out what they want to do and to be happier. And as somebody who employs other people, it's not always money. It's you have to figure out how you could take somebody and have them grow with you is a big challenge. And the other aspect I would say for growth, it's fun to have a fast growth company. It's really fun. There's a lot of challenges to it, but growth for growth's sake it ends up ends up taking you to a bad spot because you lose a lot along the way. So it's not there isn't one good easy answer to that in today's world.
And for you and your business, how has the whole COVID situation, working remotely, how has that been for you? What has been the ramifications for you, and is it going to make any sort of significant difference to the way your business operates long term post COVID?
Well, in this time, in pre-COVID, we made a very conscious decision that we're not a destination employer, right? In terms of you don't show up to this office every day and go to work. So we're casting a much broader net. We were very comfortable given all my co-founders, given all our background, knowing people can be productive working remote, given who they are and with the right structure. So our philosophy from day one is we come in the office a couple of days a week and maybe other days if we need to collaborate, but work remote from there. And our tech team only comes in once a week when they're local. But it's if you're connected and you fit with what we're doing, it doesn't matter where you are. And so it let us be very productive through all through the early lockdowns here, and actually get creative enough to do a little pivot and roll out a capability we call Research Foundry, where we just opened up a bunch of data sets and our environment so researchers and innovators and government officials could collaborate.
And so for you, how, like in the remote environment, how do you both create and maintain a company culture?
Yeah, that's even tougher, I think, in today's world because there's so much that happens influence-wise, and it really starts by being a bit objective first and foremost. Is one, a lot of transparency in what you expect from somebody, and two, then holding them accountable for what they have to deliver, and the expectations has to fit broader corporate objectives, not only the business objectives, but how you want people to interact when they are interacting. I don't care if it's on Slack or in a video conference or sitting across from each other. The most important thing is you got to be clear, and you got to state your values very clearly and what you're expecting from their performance.
And so for you going forward post-COVID, do you envisage there being any permanent changes as a consequence of COVID, or you'll just go back to the way you were?
Oh, I don't. It's for us, at least in Colorado, it's been less of a lockdown the last few months. So it's been almost back to that. We're okay 1 or 2 days a week. Sometimes there's mask mandates, but we got mask mandates back, and maybe a little more restrictions given the case counts, and other time there's not. And so I don't see us changing. I think and as our team grows, there's a couple things a couple key spots that I would prefer being close, for informal interaction. But, for us, it's, do you fit who we are as a company? Do you align with us? And I don't care where you live, as long as you're able to get the job done. And that's an advantage of being a software company. So a lot of other businesses can't do that, but we can.
Yeah. So what do you think's been your biggest challenge, or what is the biggest challenge for business owners in general in terms of their management of their staff?
I think there's, and I think it's generational depending on how old somebody is, quite frankly, and expectations, and for us is okay. It really is, employment's a contract, and you get a salary, we expect something back, and when things go beyond expectations, beyond some things that are reasonable, I think that's a challenge. And there's certain age groups that kind of expect you to give them things, versus them to perform. I mean, I'm not saying everybody in that age group, but it's been one of those challenges. And being an engineering company, you want to open up opportunities to folks that don't have opportunities, in this field, and give them a chance and help mentor. So that's another thing we work hard at doing.
Okay, so this is a little bit left field, but I'm going to ask you this because I think before you expressed an interest in, obviously you're in the military, but leadership within the military. Do you have any historical figures in mind that, I guess that you sort of admired in terms of their leadership skills, and who were they? Tell us about them.
It's going to be, in a lot of ways, it's going to be contextual, because, from just an amazing, brilliant tactician in modern history, I love George Patton. I mean, he's just a little crude, but what a brilliant tactician. And I mean, if you go back in time, how did Hannibal do what Hannibal did? Given his situation, and even some of the biblical characters, when you really look at military history, like Joshua, to me, it's always the tactician. It's always when somebody who, from a strategy perspective, did something over and beyond their actual capability they have, even from a force capability. I think those are the ones I always love to learn about and read about, and understand even how they thought about it. In the face of overwhelming force, how did you overcome that? How did they overcome that? And in a modern world, being Airforce, folks that have come up with kind of modern military air tactics, like Billy Mitchell and some others, they just were, again, thinking out of the box, and how air power, how something new changes the whole course of a conflict. And we saw it at the end of World War I, and then definitely, this really more advanced kind of mechanized warfare in World War II, and that's what we see today. Really just carried forward. It's been a lot of extensions, and this asymmetric warfare has really been a tough problem, I think, in our world today too.
All right. Yeah, no, it's interesting you talk about. I've got a little bit of interest in particularly World War II. I've read a reasonable amount about World War II, and certainly Patton stood out, certainly on the Allies side, is a truly great general. As you say, a bit controversial, but he was a man that was a real go-getter and was more aggressive. I read a book that talked about comparing the generals of the different nations, and the conclusion from it was that really the Allies tended to be more conservative in their approach, as compared to like the Russians, who were the extreme, where they had so many people, they were very expendable. So, you had the firing squad following behind you. So if you tried to run, they'll shoot you. So you just had to keep going forward. So you had those at the extreme. But Patton, certainly in what I've read, and that stood out as a really great general. And another one I've touched about this on several podcasts because it's a large book. I am almost finished it, probably taken a bit longer than I should to read it, but it's 1,000 pages. And another person that I think was a great general, and that's Ulysses S. Grant.
Oh yeah.
A man that didn't get as much credit probably at the time as what he deserved for what he achieved. I mean, everyone talked about Robert E. Lee, but Ulysses S. Grant was a very good general, very instinctive general. And been really impressed reading his biography.
Sure. And I think in a lot of ways, I mean, people try to rewrite history. He had the right motives, in terms of what he's done. And that was a really tough war. There's actually a good series it was the History Channel here that did, I think it's a 6-part series on Ulysses S. Grant, and I think very well done, and treated him very fairly, in all aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading the book by Ron Chernow, and the thing I really like about the book is can really relate to him. He was very much an imperfect man. He certainly wasn't perfect by any stretch, but in doing so, you could really feel like you could really connect with him because he was imperfect, but he was a person that, from what I have read, at least had very good intentions and tried to do his best, and was very good in some things and not so good in others.
Yeah, that's right. And
as we all are.
Yeah, we're all are. Yeah, and
exactly.
Which is something I wish, kind of as a side note, in a lot of our culture today, that we recognize that we're flawed people, and when people are truly contrite and sorry for things they may have done that weren't right, that we can choose to forgive, or we can choose to destroy.
Yeah. So for you right now, tell us a bit more about what exactly your company does.
Sure. Our core product is what we call LifeCrafts. And so think of LifeCraft as a secure place to put your data, not just your health data, but all your data. So, from if you have a social media account, like Facebook, you've heard of the social graph in terms of your connection. Well, we do that with data and how data is connected to you and to other things. That we build these graph models about your life. So LifeCrafts, in a way that's secure, it's human generated and human controlled. Individually controlled. LifeCrafts live on a LifeCraft network, and we provide LifeCraft networks that allow this data to reside in a very secure space. Again, it's got a lot of blockchain principles to how we manage data, from the standpoint of decentralized autonomous governance, and how people consent, or how data owners as organizations can consent to how data is used and even revoked in a lot of different ways. And LifeCraft networks allow these data profiles to interact and live, and to really connect and find connections where we didn't think they exist. And the whole purpose for us is to build these very smart engagements. So health engagements, learning engagements. So we do a lot of work around lifelong learning and employee development and skills development, and of course just in general professional in life, for a person. So our goal is to make data eventually, as it turns into your digital self, a way for you to own and control that, and really decide how your digital self lives in this virtual world, eventually these metaverse worlds.
So you're saying that ultimately people would be able to control their data, or data, and therefore be able to control who sees it and what they see it.
Yeah. It's the best way to describe it is, it really is your digital self. It's your data. It's your data representation of you, which is pretty robust, and most of us just don't know it. Up until this point, it's in the era of social media. It's a winner take most, and those handful of big tech companies know a heck of a lot about you, and your online footprint. And we think it's just time to try to push a little bit more of a balance of power. You see a lot of it from government regulations, like with GDPR and some of the other privacy regulations, but they only go so far. And when we get into this, and we're in this world of data abundance, we're talking about 175 zettabytes of data, which is huge, being in the global data sphere by 2025. We have tons of data being generated every day, but behind every piece of data is a person. So how do you make it more human now? How do you make it, more enablement of an enablement and not a control mechanism? And that's why we like blockchain, and not just as a tech, but as kind of that philosophy that it really lifts up an individual rights, and we kind of like that.
So at the moment, we have social media companies that obviously are collecting a lot of data on people, and they're monetizing that for their own gain. So are you saying that ultimately the power comes back to the individual, and like I would be able to say, well, I'm going to share this information about me with you, or I'm not going to?
Yeah, that's it's kind of funny, when we had all this big topic about metaverses now because Facebook changed their name to Meta. And it's only recently metaverse kind of emerged as kind of the primary term. But if you go back to where it's first coined, if you inevitably Google it, it was a novel by Neil Stephenson in 1992 called Snow Crash. But think Ready Player One, think The Matrix. There's all these dystopian environments where, there's an AI or evil big tech company behind the scenes. And is that where we want it to lead us? Because it ends up being about trust. Do we want to put our trust in a company or even a government, or is it really putting a trust in us as people? And why I like blockchain puts trust in us as people. And if our digital identity is anchored over there, it's hard for them to then monopolize. Now, it doesn't mean they won't know a lot about us when we go play in their worlds, but it doesn't mean they have to own our digital personas either.
So at this point in time, what are the ways in which you've monetized what you're doing?
We like to think of ourselves as a business to human kind of company, and we sell to the middle B. So companies that are enabling these kind of health and experiences and learning experience and, kind of professional experiences. So we're working with some higher ed companies to create educational marketplaces for lifelong learning engagements, particularly for health professionals, and how they grow, how we develop new health professionals and keep them current in this changing space. So that's been a great one. And the other one's been in life science with therapeutics and being able to allow these emergent, amazing therapeutics really get deployed and be able to interact with the people who need them in a very intelligent way. So those have been two really good things. I mean, we've had a lot of false starts, say, hey, let's go automate medical records. And I'm not sure. I mean, that's got to evolve to that. That's not a business. These smart engagements where you take health from I'm sick to an everyday, all the time thing, where it's a constant kind of interaction. That's the environment we want to help enable and grow.
So, I mean, the opportunities for you are so broad. So the challenge is narrowing it down and focusing on one or two areas, and because you could just get lost in all the opportunities, I would have thought.
Yeah, and you sound like my board members now. but that is true, and it's easy to talk about the benefits to the human. What a life graph can be for a benefit to the human. But again, our markets we're enablement technology at this point, enablement platform. So we have to, and that's been a learning process over the last year. And when coming out of I'm going to call it this COVID timeframe over the last 18 months, and we've seen this massive digital adoption and acceleration, and how we focus on where we sell, the language we use for selling and articulating benefits. And I don't think it was until the last 6 months, and my company's been around a while, that we've been able to kind of harness a language. All innovation needs a language. And so I don't think we've been able to harness our language, until about 6 months ago, because you say blockchain, people either love it or they're afraid of it. And then usually it goes to cryptocurrencies or kind of the base ledger and not all the other stuff. So
who actually started the company? Were you part of that, or you were brought on board to run it?
No, I started it with a partner. I have a co-founder, Brian Jackson, and we had been working together, probably about 10 years up to that point. And a couple of our first folks on board with us in other environments. So it wasn't all of a sudden we had this epiphany, let's go do this.
Yeah.
When we talk about, your life experience and culmination, going back to the Air Force and trying to connect the things flying really fast or in weird parts of the world that don't get to plug into the network at all, and network really didn't exist. And so all the things you learned about in this connected, disconnected world and concepts in terms of things I've pushed on in AI, all kind of rolling together and saying, hey, time is now. I mean, I think, it's one of these things, years in the making, and timing is so important, and being around to take advantage of that timing is also pretty key as a startup.
So how long ago did you start the company?
2015.
Right. Well, it's been going a fair while though.
But I would say in what we're doing now, and that rebaseline was 2017. So I think that's really the genesis of what we're doing now.
So looking back now, what do you think have been the keys to your success so far? What do you think are the defining differences which has enabled you to get to where you are, as opposed to, you could be just holding down a regular job post the Air Force, not have done a fraction of what you've done?
Yeah, I mean, being some of it is being stubborn, to be blunt. And just back to that philosophy, I think you have to. It has to almost, to me, it has to almost be vocational in many respects in terms of what you do. You spend so much of your life in your professional world. You have to have a drive, and so it's that drive. I mean, be it stubbornness to maintain it, or being able to pick yourself up and try again. I think that's it more than anything is even though sometimes it was years picking myself up, sometimes it was a few days, getting up and doing and trying again.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that you've had your family to support you, but do you think that part of your success is being quite tough mentally, being quite resilient mentally, and able to, with a few glitches along the way, but to really hang tough in there and not give up?
Sure. I mean, you have to be able to visualize where you want to be. I mean, it's that old saying, Norm Vitzapeel. Yeah. How do you, if you don't know where you're going, how do you get there? So you have to be resilient enough to know where you want to go, but astute enough to say, okay, I might have to take a different path. And that's really been it. And the other thing I'll point out, my family's been awesome from an emotional support perspective, but conversely, they also feel, okay, I got an obligation as well, so you can't take advantage of that. But professionally, I think it's also important. Again, is to have the right kind of people around you, whether in your company or not. So I don't care how old you are, you should have a mentor. You should have a group of peers that you can go sit down with and just be you without the context of having to be the boss. And then of course I think you still got to be a mentor. You got to be a mentor, and it doesn't mean just somebody that works for you. It's a lot of times it's not, and you're presented with different opportunities, and in all aspects, it allows you to grow as well.
Right. So you're saying that you should be a mentor, but also be mentored. They're two key things that are important.
Yeah. And have peers that are going to challenge the heck out of you, and question you, and that you can be open with. I think all three dimensions are important. You have different kind of relationships with mentors. You don't need 20 mentors, in my opinion. One or two are really solid and focused in parts of your life. So I have somebody helps me, on things that aren't work related, right? I'm not talking about a therapist. I'm talking about a mentor.
And when you're talking about your mentors, are these people that you just happen to know in your life, or are these like professional mentors that you pay to mentor you?
Yeah, I haven't paid anybody. They've been and people I know, because in that, and I mean there are solid professional mentors. Don't get me wrong, and there's those that are really good. In fact, there's this whole industry of like CEO coaches, and of course you have kind of peer organizations that'll pull CEOs together and let them collaborate, and those are good. And I've done the peer organizations and paid to be part of those. But from a mentoring perspective, I've not paid any, because I've been blessed enough to have people in my life that could fill that role and felt it was a mutually beneficial relationship to have that kind of relationship with each other. So,
and for you, like, I mean, you've kind of touched on it, and it's talked about a lot about how you should surround yourself with successful people in order to be successful yourself. Have you kind of in any way consciously done that, or is it just kind of evolved by sort of natural events, I guess?
There was somebody early on in my Air Force career, still a young second lieutenant, that told me, where you're going to be in 5 years is a function of the books you read and the people you associate with.
Right.
And, it's a different kind of lesson my dad taught me along the way. But which is true. So in some respects, it's been a conscious decision. And when, and I can't say all the associations have been positive. There've been some I thought were positive or actually pretty toxic looking back on them. But yeah, I think you have to be very conscious of that fact. In today's world, it's not just about, I think I still love old fashioned books. We talked about that, but there's so many other ways to get info into your brain, and even being conscious of what you're putting in your brain. And you can put a lot of stupid stuff in there that's going to take you down wrong paths too.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of that out there at the moment, haven't we, with social media, where people can go down some very dark rabbit holes.
Yeah, and particularly when they reinforce those, because they keep you on site longer.
Yeah, and that's one of the scary things at the moment, is we're seeing just blatant publication of untruthful things, and it's repeated so many times that for a lot it's then perceived as actually being reality, being the truth.
Yeah.
So we've got real challenges right now in the world about actually being able to establish and protect what is the truth.
And it's a growing problem, because what ends up happening is all this tribalization, not based on where you live, but how you're thinking. Oh, that reinforces how I think. So to me, that becomes my foundational truth, instead of challenging that is that accurate or not. And it amazes me, when I do want to go, and sometimes I'm a news junkie and sometimes I disconnect because it can be depressing, but just going to different places and seeing how the same event is reported. And you would think there are different things. But it takes a lot of energy these days to ascertain, and which means you still got to think for yourself at the bottom line.
So, I mean, what is your thoughts on how do we overcome this challenge we have right now with the proliferation of so many untruths out there?
I don't know if there's an easy answer, to be blunt, because people's personalities change as well when they're online, because they're hiding behind a screen. We're not face to face, and people become less humanized in those interactions. But I can definitely, I'm one, and they may end up censoring me at some point in time, but I advocate this pretty hard. It's not some committee in these big tech companies that are the arbiters of truth. I think we have to take responsibility as global citizens to begin to police it. I don't know any other good way out of it. I mean, one would hope at some point in time we can use a little bit of machine intelligence, but that in and of itself has its own challenges from an ethical perspective.
Absolutely. So I'm still going to make that decision about how it operates. Okay, all right. Well, let's just wrap this up though. Just to finish off, what's some parting tips or messages that you could offer to people in the audience about what you think are things that they need to be aware of, maybe skills that they need to have in order for them to go out and achieve their own success in their own lives?
Never stop learning. That's first. The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. So never stop learning. And goes back to what we're just talking about is, be conscious of who you surround yourself with. People that are going to challenge you in a good way, and how you think about things. And you don't have to associate with people just think like you do politically or economically or whatever. It really is about understanding your own personal growth, and always being self-aware in terms of where can I get better and what makes me happy in terms of pursuits in my career life. Being a startup guy makes me happy, in particularly early stages. That not going to make everybody happy for sure. So you have to understand why you do things.
And just on that bit about you saying about being a startup guy makes you happy. Presumably, though, there have been times when you've gone and thought, "Oh my God, why am I doing this?"
Oh yeah.
Like, have you ever questioned that?
Yeah, and maybe it wasn't the smartest decision to do, particularly when you invest a lot of resources in it, even your own money, and you say, "Boy, I don't know if I did the right thing there."
Yeah.
But,
it's all part of it.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I'm not sure I'd change any of it.
No, good way to be. All right, well, thank you so much, Frank, for being on Insights into Success. I know that you've agreed to come and join us on Read to Succeed in a moment, but for those that are listening to Insights into Success, we'll conclude there. But thank you so much. It's been awesome to talk to you, and get some real insight into your journey so far. So thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for letting me pontificate a little bit here.
Yeah, no, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.